The next thing I want to talk about is the story problem type you have. There are multiple different problem types for a story to fall under, and these categories make it very helpful to think about how you want your conflict to work in your story. Now, if you're writing a short story, usually short stories only have one problem type throughout the story, but perhaps you're writing a novel. You might have multiple problem types go throughout that novel in different sections. So I want to talk about each of them and break them down, define them for you so that you can understand them. So I'm going to throw these up on the screen for you so that you can read them, but I'm going to read these definitions for you too here. So the first one is a milieu story problem type. And this story has a character enter a new place in the beginning, and by the end of the story, they exit. The middle conflict is there must be a way out of here. So perhaps you have a story where a character is entering a new place. Maybe in the very beginning of the story, they get lost in the woods, right? And by the end of the story, they exit the woods, they find their way out. But the middle conflict of the story is there must be a way out of here, right? So for a short story, that makes sense for it just to be one location they go into and one place they exit. This might also just be a story problem type you have in a specific scene or a section of your story. Maybe the whole adventure of the story takes place in a mountain range and it is huge and your character's trying to get out of it. Perhaps you write a story about a hiker who, breaks his ankle while he's hiking and he's alone in the woods and he, fell off the trail. He can't find the trail and he's miles from any inhabitants and he's all alone and he has to find his way out of these woods before he dies. That would be a milieu story problem type. The next story problem type is the inquiry, where a character has a question in the beginning and by the end, they answer that question. The middle conflict is, I can't find the answer. So this is something you will see in a lot of mysteries and a lot of suspense type stories where a character has something to think about in the very beginning. They have something they're wondering, and by the end of the story, they find their answer. But the middle conflict of this story is I can't find that answer. Again, this can be something that is in a specific scene, or if you have a shorter story, this can be something that encompasses the entire story. Next, we have the character problem type. The character problem type is as follows. A character is emotionally low in the beginning, and by the end, they have reached a higher level of emotion. The middle conflict is woe is me. This is something you see where a story really focuses in on the emotions of a character. Perhaps they're at a low point in the beginning of the story where something bad happens in the very beginning, whether they lose their job, they lose their spouse, they lose a loved one, whatever it is, they lose something, or they're just at a low point when the beginning of the story begins. Maybe the beginning of the story begins at a funeral, and by the end of the story, they reach a new level of emotion. They are at a higher level, a higher state of happiness and joy. They find contentment. And the middle conflict is that they're struggling, woe is me, they're in a depressive state. That is the conflict they are facing through their story. And then lastly, the most popular story type is the event story type. And this is where a character's status quo is interrupted with action in the beginning of a story, or some kind of catalyst, or some kind of event takes place. And by the end of the story, the action is restored and there is a new status quo. The middle conflict is, I'm out of my comfort zone, I don't know how to deal with this. So for your story, if you have an event story type, you may have a story where aliens come and invade planet Earth near the beginning of the story. So that's the event, the status quo is interrupted with aliens coming. The middle conflict is they don't know what to do. They're out of their comfort zone. How do they deal with these aliens coming and invading Earth? And then by the end of the story, either they get the aliens to leave, or maybe they have peace with these aliens, whatever it is, there's a new status quo that is found and it is restored. So those are the 4 different problem types. Again, they are milieu, inquiry, character, and event. And these are just helpful to understand how to write a specific scene, section, or the entire story. You may have one problem type that encompasses the entire story. Maybe it is a character story and you're talking about this character struggling with their emotions until the very end, but throughout that story you weave into it different problem types throughout different scenes where they have different questions they need answered, they have different events take place, they have different places they enter into and leave. Whatever it is, it's helpful to understand these because then it will give you an idea of what your conflict should be when you get to certain points. So if you get stuck when you're writing or you don't know what should come next, think about these problem types and think of maybe there's one of them you haven't used in your story yet. Or maybe you get to a point where you're like, I have my character enter this place, but I don't know what should happen. Well, then maybe you should think of the milieu story type and think about how the middle conflict should be there must be a way out of here. So maybe there's a struggle in there where they're lost, or a struggle in there where they can't seem to leave until they get something and achieve something. So now they need a reason to exit. They need to accomplish a goal before they can exit. So think about your stories with these problem types so you can help yourself break away from writer's block or anything that is stopping you from continuing.